Hey, guys, Mike, your host of Craft Beer Storm. How are you doing today? Are you surviving the coronavirus pandemic? Hopefully you and your family is safe. At the time of this recording, we're still on lockdown. Only essential stores are open. And that means distilleries cannot be open either. And today we're going to talk to Colin Spoolman, who's the co-founder and distiller at Kings County Distillery. And they're in Brooklyn, New York. They're at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It's pretty awesome. I was checking out their website. They have a nice building there that they're renting. And making some good whiskey there. So had a great conversation with them. Hey, but first, have you gone on our website, on iTunes? Any platform that you are, if you give us a rating and review, we would appreciate it big time. Just gets us up in the rankings. It gets more people to understand that we exist. They have these algorithms, and if they see that people are responding and ratings, reviews, that just helps us tremendously, and it gets the word out, like I said, to more and more people. So if you do that for me, take 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, take like 30 seconds pretty much. Just go click on those 5 stars. Everything will be okay. But let's get to it. We'll get to the interview with Colin. Here we go. Hey, we have Colin Spoolman here. He's the co-founder and distiller of Kings County Distillery. How are you doing, Colin?
Very good. Good as can be expected, I suppose.
I guess yeah, come on. We're in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, the pandemic that's sweeping the earth. The whole economy shut down, right? Including some distilleries, I guess, right? So
yeah.
I mean, before we get into that, how are you coping with that? I mean, what does it mean, the effects on your business? I mean, do you have any plan or any insight on what's happening? How has it affected you?
Right. Well, I'll say, like many distilleries, we've gone from being a completely on-site business where we do we have a tasting room, we do tours of the factory, we have a cocktail bar. And now we've had to convert to being an entirely online business. And so now we're allowed to deliver within New York State our whiskeys at retail. And we converted our production to hand sanitizer. So being a whiskey distillery is not exactly a great credential to become a hand sanitizer distillery. But if you're in a position to make alcohol right now, and we are, that's what we've basically converted. About 2 weeks ago, we converted the whole production. Any ethanol that came off of the stills would go into a hand sanitizer. So that we've been offering for a pay-what-you-wish sort of scale. And then we have started selling all of our whiskeys online. And then we also are doing virtual tasting. So even as though you came to the distillery and would have a tasting flight, we just have somebody, Zoom or Google Hangout into your home and talk you through some whiskeys.
That's cool. That's a great idea. That's very innovative, and people have to think like that, because you have this situation, you got to keep going, and that's an awesome idea,
Yeah. So I would say, I think we're better off than breweries because of the possibility to make sanitizer. In fact, I would say if there are breweries out there that have the ability to get some stale beer up to New York, we'd be more than happy to distill it into sanitizer because if it's otherwise going to go to waste, that's a pretty good use for it. So we've been in conversation with a couple breweries locally, and that's a way that we can
another
work
idea.
Together.
Yeah, sanitizer. Yeah. There's no sanitizer in the stores. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Right.
First the toilet paper, now the sanitizer. It's stupid. Toilet paper, I don't know.
Believe me, if we could make toilet paper, that is what we would
Everybody's
be doing.
been analyzing it and like, why toilet paper? And nobody can come up with the answer. I don't know. But it's just been chaos. Yeah, but that's awesome that you were able to pivot and do the. Now, why the liquor stores are closed? Can you maybe? I still don't understand why they're closed. Do you have any idea? I don't know.
Well, some stores are closed. Well, I mean, across the country, the only state that's actually got their stores fully closed is Pennsylvania, as far as I can tell. But then a lot of stores is just pick up and delivery only. And in New York State, that's mostly what we're seeing. I don't know if that's even a legal mandate, but that's anyway. That's the way it's been working for people. So the liquor stores are an essential business. Alcohol distilleries, I think also breweries are considered an essential business. So we're all allowed to operate. It's just a question of how we reach consumers, which has been certainly interrupted and rearranged and reconfigured.
It's just interesting. Nobody saw, I guess, this coming, and it's out of the blue. And as a business, you have to pivot and figure out how you're going to keep the business going
Right.
and going forward. But what's good, I guess, about your product is like you age it, right? And it takes years pretty much, right, to make it. So like
Right.
if you have a couple of months where we have chaos, it's okay. Unless but it's not really okay because you need revenue coming in, but like your product is not going to really spoil, unless it has a short shelf life. Yeah, shelf life. Yeah.
Right. So in a certain way, our own internal product supply is unimpacted at all. So, we continue to have 2 and 4 year old, even a 7-year-old whiskey coming due in a few months. So we can divert our production to Sanitizer, continue to bottle some of our aged whiskey. But, obviously bottling whiskey requires people and people who feel safe working together and in a confined space. So, it's certainly trickier to operate right now and to try to, even doing the basic things that we're allowed to do, like hand out, to the public, the sanitizer and to ship the whiskey, still requires people coming in and trying to work safely. So
now, who do you sell the sanitizer to? Is it stores or like a distributor or what?
We're just offering it off of our website to anybody in New York State. Anybody that wants it, you can come pick it up. We'll ship it to you via FedEx. We hope that people will throw in a bottle of whiskey while they're at it. Some people are getting it and then donating it. We've donated to some hospitals, to FedEx, to our FedEx guy. We're trying to get it around as much as possible, but yeah, we're making it available on our website. So if you go to kingscountydistillery.com, you can just pick up 3 bottles.
That's awesome. Now, how can so if they order from your website, how is it delivered to houses? I know the states are crazy, like the way they deliver it, or can you personally deliver it? And some of the states have eased the regulations, like you can't, or you got to deliver it to somebody, but they got to be over 21 and you got to get a signature and this and that. And so how does that work for you? Do you have a van or something or?
We've been using FedEx for fulfillment within New York State.
You use FedEx, okay.
Yeah, and they can check IDs and you can ship alcohol. So we had an alcohol shipping license just for practical, getting samples to distributors and things like that.
All right, cool.
So I guess I would say of all the kinds of businesses that are out there, we were kind of, I won't say poised to pivot. But I have also long wanted there to be direct shipping from distillery to consumers, just because I do feel like what we do is such a niche, and retailers don't quite appreciate what a small distiller is in the world of, Diageo and Brown Forman and Pernod Ricard and all these huge companies that can make product on an order of magnitude and with much better pricing.
Yeah.
So it's always a hurdle to explain who you are to, not really to the consumer, but to the retailers and the distributors that stand in the middle of the 3-tier system.
Mm-hmm. Now, go ahead.
Well, just to be able to to circumvent that, even in a time of crisis, does kind of show that, in fact, this might be this might be something that belongs even after the crisis is over.
Yeah, it makes people think in a different way. A lot of people are working from home these days, and the work is getting done. So I think a lot of businesses are going to be like, why are we renting all this space,
Right.
Because it's such a big overhead. I mean, the rent, there's like payroll, and then there's like rent, right? If you go down the list and they're like, why are we renting this building when like half of our workforce can just work from home? And for me, I mean, I have some work going on in Manhattan. I'm a CPA and I do some consulting for some company in Manhattan. But I got 4 more hours in my day because I just don't have to get up, go over here, go there, go catch a train, wait, blah, blah, blah. And I got 4 more hours that I can do stuff, I mean, so I think people would probably appreciate it, especially if they have kids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, weird. But so I see, so do you just do whiskey or do you do other spirits as well, or?
We have always just done whiskey.
Okay.
And that has a lot to do with the fact that I grew up in Kentucky and not necessarily from any sort of bourbon family or anything like that. But when I moved to New York, everybody's like, oh, you're from Kentucky. You must know about, bourbon. What kind of bourbon should I drink? And I didn't know, and I sort of got sick of saying, well, I don't know anything about it. I just,
just kind of involved. I better learn how to distill because people are asking me. So how'd you get started anyway? I was going to ask you the question.
So a little bit of that, just kind of, it was my cultural inheritance, whether I understood it or not. And then another thing is that I come from really more the moonshine part of Kentucky, the Appalachian mining part where you can still get moonshine from guys who were up in the woods making it.
Yeah,
or at least you could when I was growing up. I don't know if that's.
Well, they got the show on A&E or whatever, the Moonshiners. Right. I think they're still doing it, So yeah.
Yeah. So and in fact that show first aired around the time that we opened as a business. So there was kind of this cultural moment that moonshine had back in 2010. Where people were kind of, I don't want to say rediscovering, but maybe reconsidering whether or not something made at a small scale at an older, part of this sort of handed down tradition might actually be not in fact dangerous, but actually something to consider as equal, alongside your sort of commercial whiskey and that kind of thing. And in fact, in the United States, commercial whiskey has become so commercial that there weren't really a lot of examples of smaller distillers in the way that you have with craft beer. Craft distilling is easily 20 years behind it in terms of its growth.
Right.
So moonshine really was the home brewer, movement that you saw in the early 80s start to take root. The home distiller movement, which was also part of the moonshine culture, really took off, I want to say around, the late 2000s, 2000 to 2012.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I had a brewery up in New Hampshire, so I actually brew beers. I'm just getting used or knowledgeable about the distilling process as well. Mm-hmm. And then you distill, but I see you have a lot of nice barrels. I see on your website. Where are you sourcing your barrels from?
So we get barrels from Minnesota or Missouri, depending on the size of the barrel. And the size of the barrel usually will determine for us how long the barrel will age. So the smaller the barrel, typically the shorter it's going to be around. And so we've been aging a bunch of full-size barrels, 53-gallon. But when I'm drinking Kentucky bourbon, I like to drink, something like 7 to 12-year range. And so we have been holding all of our full-size barrels for 7 years. And the first of those full-size barrels comes due in July.
Oh, really?
So that's the other, huge difference between beer and whiskey is that you do have this crazy lag from the time you make something to the time you can appreciate it.
I mean, you can't really open. Well, you can make. Can you distill stuff and age it for just a couple of months and then get it out there, or is it usually is there a minimum like for years or something like that?
Well, yeah, for sure. So, a lot of distillers will start with gin and vodka, which is, those are spirits that don't really age, don't need to age.
No.
But in our case, we started with moonshine. It was here's a whiskey before it goes in the barrel. you're told to think that this is terrible stuff because it has this association with moonshine. Moonshine is supposed to be dangerous. But think about if moonshine is made well. Surely, there are other criteria that go into whiskey besides age, and all of those are going to have an impact on the unaged spirit. So that was a little bit the fundamental sort of argument for our distillery in the beginning, which was just take age as a variable way because we're 0 years old, 1 year old, 2 year old. We don't have anything aged. Consider this young spirit on its own. And if you can appreciate that, you can see where this distillery is going to go. And I think that was 10 years ago at this point. So now I think we've started to earn in, we have a majority, all of our whiskeys are at least 2 years old in terms of our aged whiskeys. We have a 4-year whiskey that's, in less distribution, but is widely available. And then now we'll have a 7-year. And then as time goes on, we'll have more and more of those interesting aged whiskeys. But I still would argue that as a distiller, my focus is not on those, the old whiskeys. My focus is still on the distillate, what's coming off the still. And when I visit other distilleries, I like to try their unaged spirit because that shows kind of their talent and ambition and what they're out to achieve as distillers.
Because I guess if it has to be good going in, so when it comes out, I mean, it's, I guess, right, yeah. It's the same thing, it's just, if you're going to age something like it's bad, I don't know, unless the valve changes.
You can fix a bad spirit by aging it, but you can't fix a white spirit is what it is. You have to change something about your process or your ingredients or your technique, but you can age a bad spirit into a decent whiskey.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's any home distilling or something going on. I mean, is that how you or did you work for another distiller or how did that work?
No, well, so really there are, let's say 13 commercial distilleries. That's Jim Beam, Jack Daniel, Maker's Mark. Those are the ones that everybody knows. And then there are craft distillers. And when we got started, there were, I want to say there were about 10 other distillers in New York State, maybe another 50 distillers around the country. Now there are 1,500 small distillers.
Yeah.
So the explosion in craft distilling really has spanned the course of that last decade. So there wasn't a lot of precedent for a small distiller. And I really did start as a hobbyist and work my way into a commercial sort of entity, in part because distilling at home, in contrast to home brewing or home winemaking, distilling at home is illegal. And so if you want to do it with any seriousness, you almost, you have to get a license. You have to become a commercial distiller. And so I kind of felt in a way like calling the government's bluff and saying, well, you want me to be a commercial distiller? Sure, I'll go get a commercial distiller's license. And then took the thing that I've been running in my apartment down the street to a commercially demised space.
Like a space.
Yeah, just a little one-room kind of almost just a little studio. And I think it actually probably even have a picture of it. But, it was just this one room with these tiny hobby stills in it. And that was enough to kind of prove the business and kind of get
you gotta start somewhere, right?
Yeah, right. And so that helped sort of not just convince people to invest in the business, which was the obvious sort of thing that it did, but it really paved the way for the idea of, if these kids in a closet in Brooklyn are making whiskey, it could have easily been something that people would be like, no, I don't want to try that. So it was a little bit of a risky concept, but I think, very quickly the idea took off and it was clear there was interest enough to scale up. And so then in 2012, we moved into the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and that is where we have been producing since then, and moved up from 8-gallon hobby stills to now we have a 270-liter still, 190-liter still, and a 13. I'm doing gallons and liters. 1,000-liter still, 650-liter still, and a 5,000-liter still.
Wow.
But we can produce about 2.5 whiskey barrels a day in one shift right now.
Wow. So I see your building here it's just like a standalone building. It's an old building there, huh?
Yeah, so we're in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and that's obviously all sort of former industrial shipbuilding for the U.S. Navy, which means a lot of the spaces are well suited to heavy manufacturing, good electricity, floor loads, water, a lot of the things that you want as a manufacturer. But we're also close. We're in New York City. We're close to a huge audience of people that, aren't necessarily going to make the trip down to Kentucky to go visit Jim Beam, but might cross the river to Brooklyn to visit Kings County. And so most of our audience and most of our sales actually happen within New York City, even though we're distributed to 20 other states and about 6 other countries.
Wow. And then what do you got? I guess you have distributors that work with you, or?
So yeah, in New York State, we act as our own distributor. So any bar, restaurant, or liquor store can order directly from us in New York State.
Oh.
And then in other states, typically we'll go through, a Southern or a distributor, a 3-tier sort of middleman.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah. The distribution of it too is interesting. And New York State's been pretty cool with beer, and also I guess distilling as well. They're pretty pretty favorable. They've allowed a lot of stuff to happen, and they want to promote it, which is awesome. Some states are backwards, but New York has been good.
Yeah, New York State has been very good to distillers. I think because it learned so well from brewers and wineries. That it drives tourism, it promotes agriculture, it raises excise tax, which
I know
this is a source of revenue.
I know. A lot of these other states are like against it. They're limiting breweries to making X amount, and I'm like, why are you doing that? It's going to be tax revenue for you. What are you doing? It's like I just don't understand it. I don't know where these laws come from. They're usually antiquated laws that for some reason in the 1800s. I don't know, some ridiculous reason.
Yeah.
Or there's some lobbies behind it or something like that. When something doesn't make sense, there's going to be something like that. But that's cool. So where do you see? I guess that 1,500 distillery. Well, there's like almost 10,000, like 8,000 breweries. I think in the U.S. is probably going to grow.
Right. We're nowhere near where we're nowhere near where breweries are in terms.
Do you think it has the capacity to grow to that number, or what? Because wineries is like. It's over. It's like 15,000 or something wineries in the States, or I'm not sure what it is, but like.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think you'll see quite as many distilleries as you see wineries and breweries, just because of patterns of consumption. And most people, when they're drinking spirits, they're drinking it in a cocktail, and they're not necessarily after. Sometimes there's a cost factor involved in that. But certainly whiskey is a hugely growing category within spirits, and within whiskey, craft whiskey is surging. So I think, we're certainly, I don't see our business changing very much over the next 10 years. And in fact, I think there'll be a growing acceptance of the idea of whiskey being made outside of Kentucky, which has been a little bit of a challenge for us, which is just people don't necessarily perceive New York as a place where whiskey should be made in the same way that probably at a particular moment people said California, they shouldn't make wine there. So I think over time, as regionality develops, I mean, that's an interesting question and a question for us as a business, because we're making whiskey outside of Kentucky, what is it that we are doing differently from what they're doing in Kentucky that makes an argument for our existence? And so the way that I would answer that question is that we are deliberately trying to make whiskeys that avoid any single tradition too much. And so, for instance, we make a peated bourbon. So it's a bourbon in the Kentucky tradition, meets the criteria for bourbon, but we use peated barley, peated malt, which is typical of Scotch whiskeys. So to be able to take certain elements from Scotch whiskey and certain elements from bourbon whiskey and blend them together that is kind of a cool thing that we can do as a distillery that isn't beholden to either of those two traditions. And then it's our number 2 whiskey right now after bourbon. So we have our flagship, our most popular product is just a straight bourbon. But then we have the peated bourbon. We have a bottled in bond bourbon, which is kind of that's a 4-year, that's an older, higher proof, kind of more, flavor, let's say more, a little bit richer on the palate. We have a rye whiskey, an Empire Rye, and Empire Rye is a little bit of a made up thing, but some of the New York distillers got together and said, well, Tennessee once positioned its whiskeys and Jack Daniels as, they said, well, we're not going to make bourbon. That's a Kentucky thing. We're going to do Tennessee whiskey, whatever that is, and kind of made it up. And now people embrace the idea of Tennessee whiskey as being something different from bourbon, even though it really isn't all that different. So we created Empire Rye. It's a
why not
3-year-old concept, but I think because it's really initiated and administrated by the distillers, it's been a very successful project. And when it was first conceived, I was somewhat skeptical, but now I really kind of think that's our cool opportunity for us as small distillers is to kind of group together and say, we make this style of rye whiskey that's intrinsic to New York State, and it's the history of New York State is rye whiskey. So that's,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So
do you use New York ingredients? I mean, is there grain grown in New York? I know in Maine they have like loads of grain that are being grown, but in New York, I mean, you use the New York products, right?
Yeah, for the most part. So all of our unmalted ingredients, whether that's corn, rye, occasionally barley, that will come from New York State. And then all of our malted ingredients, malted barley, that usually comes from England or Scotland. So we do Thomas Fawcett Golden Promise for our standard bourbon, and then we do a Thomas Fawcett peated malt for all of our peated whiskeys. And so we do like an American single malt, which is really a Scotch style whiskey that's just happens to be made in the United States. That's another one of our kind of flagship whiskeys that does not have any New York product in it. So, but that's rare. Most times, if we can use New York State ingredients, we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I didn't realize Kentucky had like like I know Germany has the Reinheitsgebot. That's that special German purity law where it's just malt, yeast, hops, and water. That's it. If you put anything else in, they'll come in and arrest you, or you can't sell the beer. I've talked to Germans about it. They're like, "Oh man, they can't put anything else in it. It's got to be the German purity law." Like they're very strict about it. So I guess Kentucky has the same thing. I guess they're very traditional and they have the recipes and they don't want to divert from it.
Yeah, I would say that is certainly. These things evolve both in legal. They evolve in the sort of legal landscape, but also in the cultural landscape. Producers like the idea that they can band together and create these regional styles because in many cases people are too small to necessarily do it on their own. And the way that the bourbon industry has developed, it almost got so big that it absorbed, for instance, a lot of the rye whiskey that used to be made in Pennsylvania and Maryland now is distilled in Kentucky because the bourbon distilleries were so successful. They bought all the rye distilleries, shut them down, and started making the rye in Kentucky. So the idea of a historical rye, there are no distilleries left from an era even after Prohibition up to by 1970, all the rye distilleries were gone. And all the rye was being made in Kentucky, Indiana, or Tennessee. So
now you're kind of resurrecting that with your Empire Rye, I would suppose, right?
Exactly. And it is not just Kings County. It's also Hudson upstate and Dad's Hat in Pennsylvania and Wiggle in Pittsburgh. Kind of all of these different little distilleries throughout that kind of former rye region have all kind of gravitated to that. But being a Kentuckian, my preference is for bourbon. So
yeah,
we continue to make bourbon is a better seller than rye, even though there's a lot of interest in rye is growing faster than bourbon. But bourbon is still kind of the first thing that's on people's mind when they think about American whiskey.
Right. Bourbon's good. Yeah. All right. Well, it's been great. If they want to get a hold of you, people want to get a hold of you, I guess, to order stuff. How could would they go on your website, I guess, or?
So it's a whole new thing now, kingscountydistillery.com. You can not just, used to be just like sort of informational, but now you can actually shop for our whiskeys if you're in New York State. You can get some hand sanitizer, or you can sign up for a virtual tasting and taste through some of these, all these different sort of creative whiskeys that we make.
Yeah, I'm looking at your website. It's pretty cool. Check out the outline store.
And my hope is that, when time comes, people will be able to come back and visit. I think of all the distilleries, the 2 tours, we really focus a lot on kind of the history of distilling in New York City, which people don't ever really think much about. It has a very rich history, certainly before the Civil War. And we kind of tell that story, and really the Kentucky part of American whiskey history is really the last century. It was really all over the country before Prohibition, and things changed very dramatically during Prohibition. So bringing back urban distilling to the Northeast, and then even creativity within a sort of commercial landscape that has gotten very homogenous, that's certainly all part of what we are hoping to do at Kings County.
Cool. That's awesome. That's great. I appreciate what you guys are doing. You're following your passion, and I love to have guys like you on that just make something, and you want to see certain things like the Empire Rise. Awesome idea, and you're pivoting during this time of pandemic to sell stuff.
Right.
Oh, God, I don't know. But Cuomo comes on every day. He's been very good with distillers and brewers, but he's like, everything's shut down and blame it on me. And that's what he says. I'm like, all right, that's what he says. Yeah. But he's just taking precautions, and, you just got to do these things. You never know what could happen. It could turn into an epidemic. I don't know. But it's unfortunate, but businesses like yours are finding different ways to get around it and continue and make things happen until you can break out of this and then get back to normal. But That's great. I think that's awesome. So, all right. Well, I appreciate you being on and taking the time out for us, and we'll keep in touch. I got to come visit you guys.
Yeah, come by anytime. Well, don't come by anytime, but come by.
When the thing is lifted, when the cloud is lifted, we'll come down. I got to make a tour. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Hey, I appreciate your help and your time.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Cool.
Okay.
And that was Colin Spoolman. He was the co-founder and distiller at Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn, New York. A lot of interesting information about distilling, how he's coping with this coronavirus lockdown of everything. People can't go to liquor stores. They're delivering whiskey, so they kind of pivoted, and they're sending it via FedEx. So if you want some, check out their website, kingscountydistillery.com, and you can order some great whiskey from them, made in New York State. And I didn't realize there was a history of distilling in New York State, so it's interesting. And they're going forward with this Empire Rye whiskey, which is another interesting idea. And just making stuff happen, experimenting, which is cool. They have the virtual tasting, which is awesome. I think that's awesome. But, businesses have to do that, figure out how to just keep moving forward. I mean, nobody saw this thing coming, I guess. 6 months ago, we'd be like, yeah, right. And then all of a sudden, bang, everything's on lockdown. We don't know when we're going to come out of it, and it just depends on what the governor says. But everybody's got to be safe, but we have to figure a way around to try to keep our businesses open. If you have local businesses, support them however you can. I mean, these guys work hard. A lot of these guys, like this distillery is founded in 2010, almost a decade ago. and for it to kind of go away. I don't believe it will go away, but businesses that have been found 10 years ago or might not exist anymore because there's no revenue coming in. They have employees to pay. What happens to those employees? So if you got some local businesses, go and support them. Even if it's like a bagel place, go in and support them. Buy some bagels. I go to my bagel place here and I buy bagels every day because I want to support them and keep them open because they do good stuff for me when there's no pandemic, and when there is a pandemic, you got to do stuff for them, and that's the whole thing. We got to help each other out. So that's what I have for you today. That's our distillery, and we will talk to you again on Wednesday. We'll bring you another beer style on Wednesday, and then Fridays we do craft brew news. So we found some news that's non-corona linked. We did last week. We'll keep looking for that. It's just whatever, unprecedented times. But hey, I finished 75 hard. I kept talking about it. That's 75 days without any alcohol at all, not one drop. I did 2 workouts a day. A gallon of water a day. You have to read 10 pages a day. And you cannot drink any alcohol, not even a beer, nothing. But now I'm going to celebrate. I don't know what I'm going to drink tonight. I think I have a beer. I think I'm going to have a beer. Grab a beer. Can't go anywhere and have one, but I can take one home. And there you go. So I appreciate you guys signing in and listening to me. It really helps me out a lot to preach what we want to preach, and you listening and telling your friends about us. I mean, that's awesome. And hey, following my passion, and you figure out your passion and follow yours. There's a lot of time now, right? You're home. Really look at your life and see what's happening. And if you got ideas, go for it. Go for it. Nothing's off limits. I'm hearing from some mentors of mine. If you have a business and you have some competitors, hey, maybe they're receptive to you taking them over. Why not? They might be in big bad times right now, and you could probably pay nothing. Have the conversation, collaborate, and move forward. Right? That's what we have to do. Okay. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you on Wednesday with another beer style. Take care.